Now for some analysis from our politics panel. Jeffrey Goldberg is a national correspondent for The Atlantic. Ed O'Keefe covers politics for The Washington Post. Leslie Sanchez is a Republican consultant and contributor to our digital network, CBSN. And Mark Leibovich is a chief national correspondent for the New York Times Magazine. All right, Jeffrey, what do you make of Donald Trump and where he is on immigration? Nothing's changed, Ben Carson says, and Kellyanne Conway says.
You know, I was just thinking about Ed's job. Ed has one of the harder jobs in journalism right now because he has to cover moment to moment Donald Trump's rhetorical and possible policy shifts on immigration. It's very hard to keep up. I mean, it really is. Obviously, he was trying to pivot away from a very, very hard position. He understands that he has a floor and he understands that he has a ceiling. The floor, his core supporters want to hear that tough rhetoric, but he knows that he's not punching through a ceiling unless he softens. And this whole week has been this vertigo-inducing kind of a rhetorical spinning, trying to please all camps. And what he's doing is he's risking alienating the base without actually punching through the ceiling and convincing people that he's softening, as the word goes.
Leslie, the ceiling that Jeffrey's talking about is this notion that there are Republican women voters, Republican college-educated voters, who are looking for some proof, and they don't like Hillary Clinton, so they're really going to grab anything they can, but some proof that Donald Trump is softening, that he's listening to advice. Is this a gambit towards that group?
Definitely, and the person who would know that very well is Kellyanne Conway. She's certainly somebody who's helped close that women's gap for Republicans for 20 years. And what's interesting, when you close the Hispanic gap, when you start to sound more inclusive and talk, instead of this white-hot rhetoric that we've heard for the better part of the last year, and exclusiveness, but more inclusive, you actually close the women's gap as well. And that's where they're really aiming. It's not so much communities of color, I think, as white independents.
It's a bank shot. So, Ed, is it working based on your reporting?
Well, you know, speaking to some white women this week, actually at a rally in Florida, it was working because the argument, they're Trump supporters to begin with, and they made clear as long as the wall is untouched, as long as it's still built, basically, we have no problem with him modulating here on everything else. And so he made no news on the wall. He still insisted Mexico would somehow pay for it. So to them, they were fine with that. But yeah, he's got an 82% disapproval rating with Hispanics. He's not going anywhere there. Jeffrey says it's a hard job. It reminded me this week of covering Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio a year ago. While their immigration policy was pretty clear, they would subtly modulate every once in a while and say something slightly different, and you'd have to be attuned to that. And I think the folks covering Trump closely got a taste of that this week. But at the end of the week, he's back to where he was. Nothing changed. I think Leslie's right. It may have confused things enough for some voters who were skeptical of him to say, well, at least he was talking about it, when in reality it sounds like nothing will change.
But we expect the shilly-shally from regular politicians that you named. But Donald Trump has built his brand on, I say it, it's true, and he's built his brand on immigration, his central signature issue.
Correct. No, I would say that this week has been a very muddled week for whatever that immigration message is. I mean, his, like you said, his brand has been one of decisiveness. It will be one of, I mean, a deportation police. He explicitly talked about a deportation force several months ago. And when you ask Kellyanne or any of his surrogates or him himself, he sort of says, we'll have to wait and see now. You do sort of wonder, is this modulated, softened tone going to win him, any new supporters, but will it alienate the base, the people who sort of brought him here?
Well, there's a point to be made to that. You can ask Marco Rubio, dial them, or John McCain what happens when you shift on immigration, because among the hardliners, there's no going back. There's two key words, right? There's amnesty and the wall. And on those areas, hardliners never move, but it's a losing issue for Republicans. It is not possible to build a contiguous wall across the U.S.-Mexico border. It's not going to happen. You have the Rio Grande River, you have river floodplains. It's just not feasible, and I think the reality is somewhere in the middle. They have to find an approach that works.
And where are we in? Last week, Donald Trump expressed regret. Leslie talked about Kellyanne Conway's talent is for helping candidates pitch to different constituencies. Where are we in the Donald Trump evolution? Is this a new version of Donald Trump? When he called Hillary Clinton a bigot, that got some people concerned that he was going back to the old Trump. Where do things stand now?
I don't see any real discernible movement towards a warmer, fuzzier Trump when he says things like that, when he fires off these tweets about Dwayne Wade's cousin and says, vote for me, before a few hours later expressing condolences. When he continues to talk about a deportation, or his surrogates talk about a deportation force or illegals or the Hispanics. None of that works. None of it will work. And the voters I talk to, the experts that look at this I talk to say, like, this is, if he's going to be transactional like that, it may just make it worse for him in any attempt to try to be a unifying figure. If it gives some comfort to skeptical Republicans, fine. But they should have been expressing that concern a year ago. This has been baked for a while.
Yeah, it is a little late to be sort of to try the unifying figure thing, I would say. I mean, people
it's
talk.
not his nature.
It's
I
just
just
not
think
his
it's
nature.
exactly.
I mean, I think one thing again. I mean, what was one of his biggest assets was the decisiveness. I mean, this is a sort of confused version where, okay, where does he stand after all? And people talk about the bigot, saying, okay, he called Hillary Clinton a bigot. I mean, this is not in a vacuum. I mean, this came after a pretty blistering speech that Hillary Clinton gave. I guess it was Wednesday on the alt-right movement, which to me was striking. One, in that it was not actually a name-calling speech. It was using his own words, his own policy, his own history, pretty, I think, cohesively against him. And what was striking about the reaction was, other than Donald Trump saying she's a bigot, there was really, unless I missed it, there were not a lot of Republican leaders, a lot of traditional Republicans who were rising to his defense, which I think spoke volumes, maybe more so than whatever came out of his mouth.
And by the way, the purpose of one of the purposes of that speech was to force him to revert back to his usual self, which is he has said, I'm attacked, I will attack. So they predicted, the Clinton campaign pretty much knew that he would say something bigot in this case, and that again is trying to bring him back to what they think of as his true nature, where he's moving, I think, again on immigration and other issues, the confrontational, the harsh language. No matter how much they try to muddy it up this week, we're back to where we were. I think
it was probably also Hillary Clinton trying to change the topic from her own bad news, which we'll switch to in a moment. But Leslie, let me ask you this question about what Hillary Clinton tried to do in that speech, which is hive off or cut off Republicans from Trump, saying he has this relationship to this nationalist, racist group, but that's not Republicans. Do you think that will be successful? She's defending the party against Donald Trump. Does Hillary Clinton have any standing to do that?
I think there are a lot of Republicans who tried to do the same thing earlier in the primary. What finally came out, if we go back to earlier this year, is Donald Trump disavowed, denounced any of these organizations, these extremists who supported his campaign, and distanced himself to the best of his ability. Did he do it quickly? No. He waited too long. It was in the media cycle, especially in Iowa, when there were these accusations of robocalls by some of these white extremists that were impacting the caucuses. I don't think it's new. I don't think it's particularly effective, because on that particular issue, people have made up their mind. Now they're trying to decide it's the lesser of two evils, so to speak. It's really not tone at this point.
Well, I would say, I'm sorry.
Well, I would just, to me, when she talks like that is less about winning over Republican voters. It's about sort of reminding Republican lawmakers that when you get back to town, should I be president, I still want to work with you. I understand the difference between you, Paul Ryan, and Mitch McConnell, than you, Donald Trump. And that if I'm going to be a successful president, I'm going to need to find a way to work with you on something. That, to me, is just code. It's her saying to them, I see the difference.
Yes, although I do think that it is targeted directly at Republican voters, particularly in the suburbs of Cleveland, Denver, and so forth. And look, if you look at the numbers since the conventions, I mean, her numbers she's probably gained about 8 or 9 points, from, if you believe the deficit she was at coming in. I mean, these are Republican voters. I mean, the Democratic convention was geared very, very explicitly and very, very clearly, I think, at Republicans, at mainstream Republicans, at Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio Republicans, what have you. And I think it's been very effective, and I think it's going to continue.
And this is an attempt also, they see him trying to pivot, and they're trying to say you can't pivot away from this.
I also don't think that it's only directed at Republicans. I mean, this is a get out the vote attempt by Hillary Clinton to remind Hispanics, blacks, Asians, everyone, that these are the people he's associated with. It's very important to mobilize those numbers, and that's how you do it, I think. I don't think it's ineffective at all. I think it's very effective to remind people that David Duke likes Donald Trump. I think that works.
There's the same kind of argument was made in 2008 when people were talking about the alignments and the associations that Barack Obama had through the history of his grassroots campaigning. People have such a baked-in idea, especially Republicans, when it comes to Hillary Clinton, right? So for many Republicans who never thought they would see themselves in a position of voting for Hillary Clinton, it's not going to be moved on this identity politics as much as who's going to be changing the direction of the country.
All right, we're going to be back and talk about Hillary Clinton's news this week. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. And we're back with more from our politics panel. Mark, I'll start with you. Hillary Clinton this week, there were two disclosures or two developments. One, a set of emails that showed a kind of cozy relationship between staffers at the Clinton Foundation and staffers at the State Department. And then 15,000 or so new emails are found that weren't turned over from the homebrew server. Take either one of those you want, and whether this is, this is coming up periodically, and one expects it will until election.
It is. It's a dull ache for them. I mean, what's interesting about this week is it links the two kind of big lurking issues, email and the foundation. I mean, it really sort of brought them together into the same conversation. Frankly, this was a bad week for it should have been a bad week for the Clinton campaign. I think, again, the Trump campaign kind of muddled its own advantage by talking about Hillary Clinton's health and what have you. But you do sort of wonder why. I mean, with the foundation at least. I mean, a lot of people have suggested why not turn over the operations of the foundation going forward to, say, the Gates Foundation or someone who knows how to do this, who can incorporate all of the resources. I realize it's complicated, but it could foreclose a lot of these suspicions. It could be a sort of decisive answer, and I think their unwillingness to do this and to try to sort of litigate this, maybe more than they need to, gets to a kind of something between entitlement and maybe false confidence in this election.
Here's what I wonder, Jeffrey. Hillary Clinton, about 30% of the people trust her. So the response from the Clinton camp to these questions of these emails clearly show that when somebody from the Clinton Foundation sends an email, there's some fussing around to try to help them out. Now, maybe there's not a pay to play, but there's a lot of activity based on the fact that people have given a lot of money. And the Clinton campaign says nobody got any meeting or anything because they gave donation. Does that pass the smell test?
Look, there's a presumption of nefariousness on the part of the foundation and the Clintons. In this particular case, look, I agree that the foundation probably should have been, to borrow a phrase, walled off a while ago, right? that there should have been a way to put that in trust. That said, this story there, I think there's less than meets the eye. I mean, most of the people who we're talking about, there's a Nobel Prize winner, for instance, from Bangladesh, who would get a meeting with any Secretary of State. There are heads of state who have given money to the foundation who would get meetings with the Secretary of State. And the problem here is that no one can prove that these people got anything out of these meetings. All that said, there's an appearance of coziness, I guess, is the word that you're using.
And if you won't even admit a little coziness, I mean, Leslie Donna Brazil said basically, Republicans see it as nefarious, Democrats call it a meeting, but the Clinton campaign's barely even saying it's a meeting. They're saying there was no relationship here at all. Don't they have to admit a little bit that, yes, okay, you get some emails got returned, but, some people got a meeting, some people didn't, and it's not as bad as you think, but they're not even saying that.
No, it's what your definition of meeting is. This is clearly pay-to-play scheme. And as much as Republicans like to use that in their talking points, there's so much smoke there that the bigger question is, isn't this part of the pall that always surrounds the Clintons? It brings you back to selling access to the Lincoln bedroom, all the different things that come part of this package deal of Bill and Hillary Clinton. So I would even say that the independents who are looking at possibly supporting Hillary Clinton are looking at this again and saying, here we are on these corruption ideas.
I'm sorry, but show me one thing that someone got from Hillary Clinton's State Department because they happened to give money to the Clinton.
Well, they did get the meetings. I mean, there is this email train between.
I'm waiting for actual
well,
evidence.
they've asked for investigation.
I'm waiting.
That's because your bar is meeting doesn't mean anything because there are a lot of meetings that happen.
She has 100 meetings a week.
But there are these emails between Doug Band and Humed that came out this week that said, look, this is a friend of ours. Maybe you can do this. And then they get a short, but a meeting nonetheless. I mean, yes, maybe the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia would get the meeting anyway, but this is clearly, you would think, but these are skids being greased, and there's actually email traffic.
Part of this is very interesting, because part of this is why Donald Trump is succeeding to the degree that he succeeded. This is Washington. People who know each other and who are influential meet with other influential people they happen to know and who know people. That's human nature and that's politics, and this is what people outside of Washington do find. This is not a Clinton-specific issue. This is an example of it.
We're going to have to go, but people who write big checks get things that they want, even if it's not the big casino, they get what they want, and that's what makes people sick about Washington.
Right.
Exactly. That's going to be it for us today.